fat to be a Luna, they said, until the cold alpha claimed me in front of all. Shadows danced across the stone walls, whispering secrets older than the kingdom itself. In the great hall, nobles gathered in a semicircle, their eyes sharp, their whispers like knives. The air was thick with expectation and judgment. Every pack member knew this day would decide the future of the Luna, the mate of the Alpha who ruled with iron and instinct. Lyra stood at the edge of the hall, her heart hammering like a drum in her chest. She tried to hold her shoulders back, tried to make herself small and unseen, yet every step she took felt like the entire court's attention followed her. She knew the words that would come, the judgment she had carried all her life. Too fat, too soft, too ordinary to hold a title that demanded perfection. Her boots echoed against the stone floor as she approached the center. She could hear the snickers, the polite coughs meant to cover amusement, the quiet mutters of disapproval. She had prepared herself for the humiliation. She had steeled herself against it, but nothing could fully brace her for the sting of eyes that measured her like she were a flaw in their perfect world. And then she saw him, Kale, the Alpha. His presence was a chill in the room, sharp and commanding. He sat upon his throne like a mountain, silent, unyielding. His eyes were pale as frost, cold and unreadable, and yet they seemed to pierce straight into her soul. Rumors had swirled about him for years, tales of his ruthless judgments, his icy demeanor, his heart untouched by warmth. Few dared approach him without fear. Lyra's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with a strange mix of curiosity and dread. She had heard the stories, but she had never seen the man in person, and to stand before him now, in the light of judgment and expectation, felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, looking into a storm. The head noble stepped forward, his voice smooth and practiced. "The candidates for Luna," he said, eyes flicking over the assembled pack, "have gathered. The Alpha will choose the one who embodies the strength, wisdom, and grace our pack demands." Lyra felt her stomach twist. Strength, wisdom, grace. Words that seemed to mock her very existence. She had spent her life proving herself, training with the younger pack members, learning to fight, to strategize, to lead. Yet here she was, and the whispers had already labeled her inadequate. A ripple of laughter ran through the nobles. Lyra stiffened, biting her lip. She could feel heat rise to her cheeks, shame threatening to pull her under. She wanted to shrink, to vanish, to disappear into the shadows where no one could judge her. And then the world shifted. Kale's eyes moved, slow and deliberate, toward her. The room seemed to still. Whispers faltered. Nobles turned their heads, following his gaze, and in that instant, Lyra felt the weight of hundreds of expectations pressing down on her. She held her breath. "You," Kale said, his voice low but carrying across the hall like the rumble of distant thunder. Every word landed with gravity, drawing all attention. "Step forward." Lyra froze. All eyes were on her. The laughter died abruptly, replaced by stunned silence. She swallowed hard, her throat tight, her hands trembling slightly. The other candidates looked at her with disbelief. Some hid smirks, others clenched their fists, anger flashing in their eyes. She knew what they thought. How could he possibly choose her? How could he see what they did? Yet she moved, feet carrying her forward almost against her will. Each step felt like walking through fire. Every whispered insult, every sideways glance seemed to scrape against her skin. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to hold her head high. Kale's eyes never wavered from hers. They were not cruel, but they were sharp, measuring, piercing. Lyra felt as though he could see into the very core of her, the fire she had buried under years of judgment, the strength she had learned to hide, the vulnerability she never allowed anyone to see. When she reached the center of the hall, Kale rose from his throne. The sound of his boots on the stone echoed like a drumbeat in her chest. His presence filled the space, commanding attention, drawing every gaze. "You," he said again, and the simplicity of the word carried weight heavier than any sentence. "You will be Luna." The hall erupted in gasps. Whispers rose to murmurs, murmurs to outcries. "Impossible," one noble cried. She cannot." Another whispered, disbelief dripping from every syllable. Eyes narrowed, jaws clenched, but Kale's voice cut through the uproar. "She will be Luna," he said again, firmer this time. "And that is my command." Lyra's knees nearly buckled. She had not expected this. Shock, disbelief, and something deeper, something she had never allowed herself, swelled in her chest. Hope, pride. Fear tangled with exhilaration, leaving her breathless. Kale's gaze softened for a moment, just a fraction, and Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine. Then he turned, and with a nod, the court fell silent. The moment was hers, though she could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes judging every inch of her, every curve, every flaw they had once mocked. The ceremony continued, but the world around her felt different. The snickers were quieter, the whispers cautious. She could see the unease in the nobles' faces, their plans of mockery disrupted by Kale's choice. Lyra felt a strange power rising within her, a strength born of survival and defiance. After the formalities, Kale left the hall, and the pack followed in hushed anticipation. Lyra's heart raced. She had claimed her place, but she knew her trials were just beginning. To be Luna was more than a title. It was a responsibility, a challenge, a test of every skill she had learned and every ounce of courage she possessed. Later, in the quiet of the inner chambers, she found Kale waiting. His back was to her as he stood looking out at the moonlit forest. Lyra hesitated, unsure how to speak, unsure even how to stand in his presence without faltering. "You have questions," Kale said, his voice carrying the faintest trace of amusement, though his tone was still cold and measured. Lyra nodded. "Why me? Why choose me when everyone says I'm unworthy?" He did not turn to answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon, and the wind outside whispered through the open windows. "I choose strength where others see weakness," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "I choose courage where others see fear. And I see something in you that the court cannot understand." Lyra felt her throat tighten. His words were simple, yet they carried a weight she could not ignore. For the first time in her life, someone powerful had recognized her not for her flaws, but for her essence. "And yet," she said softly, "you are cold. I do not understand you, Kale. Why stand so far from everyone? Why from me?" He finally turned, his pale eyes locking onto hers. There was a storm beneath the calm surface, something ancient and dangerous. "I am not easily understood," he said, "and perhaps you will be tested more than anyone realizes. To stand by me as Luna is not just honor. It is trial, it is fire, it is danger." Lyra's heartbeat quickened. She felt a thrill mingled with fear. To be chosen was a gift, yes, but also a challenge. To face Kale's world with all its power, mystery, and peril was to step into a storm that few survived. And yet in her chest, a small flame of determination blazed. She would not falter. She would not shrink. She would face whatever trials awaited her. Kale's expression softened for a heartbeat. "You have courage," he said, "and courage is rare, but the world will test you. Are you ready to face it?" Lyra drew in a steadying breath, her spine straight, her chin lifted. "I am," she said. "I will not fail." A faint, unreadable smile touched Kale's lips, and the tension between them hung like a tangible thread, taut and electric. The moonlight spilled over the room, illuminating the distance between their worlds, the warmth she carried, the cold he wore like armor. And yet somehow it felt like the beginning of something neither fully understood. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, carrying whispers of prophecy and fate. Lyra knew that this night had changed everything. The court would never see her the same way again, nor would she ever see herself the same. But what she did not yet know, and what the forest seemed to hint at in its shadowed whispers, was that choosing her as Luna was only the first move in a game far older, far darker, and far more dangerous than she could imagine. And as Kale turned to leave, a faint shadow moved in the moonlight beyond the window, something ancient, patient, and watchful, waiting. Lyra's heart skipped. This was only the beginning. The days that followed Kale's choice were heavy with whispers and tension. Lyra walked the halls of the Alpha Court like a shadow moving between light and dark, aware of every glance and every murmur. Nobles who had once mocked her now stared with a mixture of resentment and curiosity. She could feel their judgment, their expectation, even their envy. Yet beneath it all she carried a spark of determination. She would not be broken. She would prove herself as Luna, not to please them but because she knew her own strength. Kale remained distant, as cold as the mountain winds that swept across the court. He gave no instructions, no small comforts, only brief nods and measured words. To many he seemed indifferent, but Lyra felt something else. Beneath his ice there was a tension, a careful watchfulness. He observed her, testing her courage, her patience, her resolve. And she knew in her heart that she would have to earn his trust, not only to survive, but to stand beside him as equal. Training sessions began at dawn, in the open courtyard where frost still lingered in the corners of the stones. Kale expected precision, endurance, and focus. He was merciless, pushing her beyond what she thought her body could endure, challenging her mind as well as her strength. At first, she stumbled, her movements awkward, her confidence shaken by the cold glare of her alpha. But with each day she grew sharper, stronger, more assured. Yet it was never easy. Kale's expectations were exacting, and his presence, always watching, always judging, pressed down on her like the weight of the winter sky. Every mistake, every slip, seemed magnified under his gaze. And yet, when she persevered, when she showed resilience, there were rare moments when his eyes softened, a fleeting flicker of approval that left her heart racing. It was during one of these dawn sessions that the first true test came. A rival pack had arrived, disguised as traders, but their intent was clear: to test the strength of the Alpha and his Luna. They challenged the court with subtle threats, questioning Kale's leadership and mocking Lyra's recent promotion. The nobles tensed, but Kale did not flinch. He merely watched. Lyra stepped forward, heart pounding, as a shadow of doubt flickered within her. She felt the court's eyes on her, some full of expectation, some brimming with disbelief. She remembered the words whispered behind her back, the judgment she had carried all her life. But then she heard Kale's voice, low and steady, guiding her. "Stand firm, do not falter." Taking a deep breath, she squared her shoulders and faced the intruders. The cold air bit at her skin, but she ignored it, focusing on the rhythm of her breath, the strength in her limbs, the fire in her heart. Every movement was deliberate, every word measured. She countered their challenges with calm, controlled confidence, her voice steady even as her pulse raced. Kale stood beside her, silent, observing. His presence was a shield, but also a challenge. He offered no praise, no encouragement, only his unwavering gaze. And yet that gaze was enough to steady her, to remind her that she could rise to the occasion. By the time the intruders realized they could not intimidate the Luna, they retreated, defeated not by Kale's strength, but by hers. The court was silent, unsure how to react. Some eyes widened in astonishment, others narrowed with jealousy. And through it all, Kale's eyes never left hers. Later, in the quiet of the private gardens, Lyra confronted him. "Why do you push me so hard?" she asked, her breath forming clouds in the cold morning air. "You see the strength in me, yet you treat me as if I am unworthy." Kale's expression was unreadable, but his voice was softer than usual. "Strength without discipline is dangerous," he said. "The court will test you. The pack will test you. I will test you. You must be ready." Lyra's hands clenched. "I am ready. I will prove myself." Kale's gaze held hers, unflinching. "It is not just about proving yourself," he said. "It is about understanding what it means to bear the title of Luna. To stand beside me is not honor alone. It is responsibility, sacrifice, and courage beyond measure." The weight of his words pressed down on her, but rather than intimidate, they ignited something within her. She understood in that moment that being Luna was not merely a role of ceremony or title. It was a challenge, a journey into trials she had never imagined. And she would face it, not for approval, not for the court, but for herself, and for the Alpha who had chosen her. As days turned into weeks, Lyra's presence began to shift the atmosphere of the court. Where once there had been ridicule, there was now a grudging respect. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that could not be ignored. Yet, Cale remained a mystery. His cold demeanor never fully thawed, and there were moments when she felt the distance between them like a chasm too wide to cross. Then came the night of the full moon ceremony. The Alpha court gathered once more under the pale light, the moon casting long shadows over the frost-laden ground. This ceremony was sacred, a time to honor the bond between Alpha and Luna and to demonstrate the strength of the pack. Lyra had prepared herself, but even so, her heart raced. She knew that the rivals still watched, that the court still whispered, and that Cale's expectations remained as daunting as the cliffs surrounding the court. The ceremony began with ritual chants, the sound of drums echoing through the valley. Lyra followed Cale through the motions, her movements precise, her mind sharp. She could feel his eyes on her, measuring, judging, yet there was something else, an acknowledgement of her determination, a silent recognition of the growth she had shown. But then, a shadow moved at the edge of the clearing. A rival faction had infiltrated the ceremony, seeking to humiliate Lyra and challenge Cale's leadership. The nobles gasped as they realized the threat, panic flickering across their faces. Lyra felt her heart seize, but Cale's presence was beside her, unwavering. He did not speak, did not give orders. He simply stood, a mountain of strength, his cold gaze fixed on the intruders. And in that moment, Lyra understood. This was her trial, her moment to rise. With measured movements, she advanced, countering the intruders' provocation with calm precision. She felt the weight of the court's eyes, the tension in the air, and yet she did not falter. Each step, each gesture, each word carried the power of her resolve. Cale moved only when necessary, a force of precision and strength, defending her with calculated intensity. The intruders faltered, realizing too late that they could not challenge the Alpha and Luna together. By the end of the confrontation, the threat had been neutralized, and the court was left in stunned silence. Lyra's chest heaved, her body trembling with the exertion and adrenaline. She had faced the test, and she had not failed. Yet as she looked at Cale, she saw not warmth, not praise, but the same icy calm that had always defined him. And she understood that his distance was not absence, it was protection, a barrier shaped by his own pain and history. After the ceremony, the court dispersed, leaving the gardens quiet and empty. Lyra found Cale standing beneath the moonlight, his silhouette sharp against the silver glow. She approached cautiously, unsure what to say, unsure if she dared to break the silence between them. "You did well," Cale said finally, his voice low, almost softer than she had ever heard. "Few would have held their ground. Fewer still would have stood beside me in the way you did tonight." Lyra felt a flush of pride, tempered by the lingering tension. "And yet," she said, "you still remain distant. I do not understand you, Cale. You see me, you push me, yet you hold yourself apart. Why?" Cale's gaze met hers, sharp and unyielding. "Because to stand beside me is to face not only the pack, not only the court, but the shadows of the past. You must learn to navigate both without faltering." Lyra's heart pounded. She had faced ridicule, trial, and challenge, yet this barrier of emotion, of distance, of mystery, was more daunting than any rival, more testing than any physical challenge. And yet something within her stirred. She was not afraid, not entirely. She felt a strange, magnetic pull toward the Alpha, toward the man who was as much a mystery as he was a force of power. As she stood there, under the full moon, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible warning. The trials were far from over. Something ancient, something patient was stirring in the shadows. And though she could not see it yet, she could feel it. The weight of fate, the pull of destiny, and the truth that the bond she shared with Kale would be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. Kale turned away then, his cloak rustling in the wind. "Rest now," he said, his tone clipped but not unkind. "Tomorrow will bring new trials, be ready." Lyra nodded, her mind swirling with thoughts, her heart heavy with questions and longing. She had survived one trial, proven herself in the eyes of the pack, and yet she knew the journey was only beginning. Kale's presence, cold and commanding, had both terrified and enthralled her. She sensed that the man who had chosen her was more than the rumors suggested, more than the icy mask he wore. Beneath it, there was depth, there was struggle, there was something waiting to be revealed. And as she gazed at the moonlit horizon, a shiver ran through her. The forest beyond the court seemed to stir, alive with unseen eyes, watching, waiting. The path ahead was uncertain, shadowed by danger and mystery, yet she felt a flicker of determination burn within her. She would face it all. She would stand beside Kale, not as a shadow of doubt, but as Luna, strong and unyielding. Yet even as hope and resolve filled her, a faint sense of unease lingered. The night had not ended quietly. In the distance, beyond the silver light of the moon, something ancient and patient stirred, its gaze fixed upon her. And in that moment, Lyra knew that her trials and her journey with the cold alpha were far from over. The wind carried a whisper through the trees, a whisper that promised both danger and destiny. And Lyra, heart pounding, knew that tomorrow the shadows would move, and nothing would ever be the same. The forest beyond the Alpha Court was alive with shadows, tall trees swaying under the silver light of the full moon. Lyra stepped cautiously among the roots and frost-covered leaves, her breath visible in the cold night air. Kale had disappeared earlier, slipping into the wilderness without explanation, leaving only a faint trail that called to her. Something in her chest urged her forward, a mixture of curiosity, determination, and a strange, unshakable pull toward the Alpha who had chosen her as Luna. Her boots crunched softly over frozen soil as she followed the faint glimmer of moonlight filtering through the trees. The deeper she went, the quieter the world became. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, and the night creatures watched from their hidden nests, sensing the weight of destiny pressing down upon her. Every step was careful, yet each brought her closer to something she could not name, something that whispered of trials, truths, and the power that Kale had carried silently for centuries. Finally, she saw him. Kale stood upon a rise, the moonlight casting his sharp silhouette across the forest floor. His cloak was still, but his eyes, pale and piercing, seemed to hold the weight of the stars themselves. For a moment he said nothing, merely watching her approach. Lyra felt a shiver, not of fear, but of anticipation. The Alpha was as distant as ever, yet his presence drew her in, as though the cold air between them held a quiet promise. "You came," Kale said finally, his voice low, measured, and calm. "I had to," Lyra replied, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "I needed to know why you brought me here." Kale's gaze softened for the briefest instant. "This is where you will understand the path you have chosen. This forest, it holds the old magic, the remnants of power older than any pack, older than any throne. To be Luna is not simply to stand beside me. It is to face what has been hidden, to confront the shadows, and to claim strength where fear resides." Lyra's brow furrowed. "Shadows? What do you mean?" Kale's expression darkened, pale eyes reflecting the moonlight like shards of ice. "I mean the truth you cannot yet see. There are forces in this world that test the Alpha, the Luna, and the bond they share. Forces that will challenge both your courage and your heart. Tonight, you will see why I am the way I am, and why few survive beside me willingly." The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a low, whispering murmur through the trees. Lyra felt it brush against her skin, a cold, almost sentient presence. Her heart skipped. She could feel the power in the forest, ancient and patient, and she realized that Kale had not spoken lightly. The trials she had faced in the court were only the beginning. Kale extended a hand, pale and strong. "Follow me," he said. They walked in silence through the twisting paths, the air thick with tension and expectation. The forest seemed to move around them, shadows stretching and twisting as if observing, judging. Lyra's pulse quickened with both fear and exhilaration. She had faced ridicule, mockery, and the court's scrutiny, yet this raw, unyielding magic was something she had never encountered. Finally, they arrived at a clearing where the moonlight poured down like liquid silver. In the center lay a circle of ancient stones, carved with symbols older than memory. Lyra stepped forward cautiously, awe and wonder filling her chest. "This is the heart of the forest," Kale said, his voice reverent for the first time she had heard. "Here the Alpha faces the echoes of the past, the remnants of power and the weight of old curses. It is not safe, it is not easy, but it is necessary." Lyra swallowed hard, her gaze flicking between the stones and Kale. "And what of me? Why bring me here?" Kale's gaze met hers, pale eyes searching. "Because you are not merely a spectator. To stand as Luna is to face the trials alongside me. You are strong, braver than many who have worn the title. But strength alone is not enough. You must understand courage, trust, and sacrifice. Only then can the bond between Alpha and Luna be complete." Before she could respond, the ground trembled. Shadows rose from the stones, twisting into forms both human and monstrous, reflections of fear and doubt. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She had faced many challenges before, yet these were different. These were not rivals or insults. These were fears made real, shadows of the past that Kale had carried silently, now brought to life by the forest's ancient magic. Kale moved beside her, his presence steadying, though his own eyes were sharp and alert. "Do not falter," he said. "These shadows test not only strength but heart. Stand with me." Lyra nodded, drawing a deep breath. The first shadow lunged, its form shifting like smoke, and she met it with resolve. She could feel her courage, her determination, rising like fire. With each step, each gesture, each heartbeat, she learned to stand against the fear, to face what the forest conjured, and to trust in Kale's presence beside her. The battle with the shadows was not physical alone. It was a trial of will, of heart, and of trust. Lyra felt her doubts and insecurities materialize in the shapes before her, mocking her, testing her resolve. And yet she did not retreat. She faced them, held her ground, and with Kale beside her, the shadows began to falter. When the final shadow dissolved into the mist, the clearing fell silent. The moonlight bathed them both, revealing their figures side by side, hearts racing, breaths visible in the cold night air. Lyra realized then that she had not only faced the forest's trial, but she had faced herself. The doubts, the fears, the whispers that had haunted her all her life. And she had endured. Kale turned to her, his expression unreadable, yet there was a hint of something she had not seen before, pride, perhaps, or relief. "You have done well," he said softly. "Few would have stood here, not only against the shadows, but against themselves." "You are stronger than I expected." Lyra's heart swelled. "I could not have done it without you," she admitted, her voice trembling with exhaustion and exhilaration. Kale's gaze softened, pale eyes meeting hers. For the first time, the wall of coldness that had always defined him seemed to shimmer, fragile and human. "And yet," he said, "it is not just my strength that guided you. It is yours. You have faced fear, doubt, and judgment, and you have endured. That is what makes you Luna." The forest seemed to exhale, the shadows retreating into the mist, leaving a calm, serene silence. Lyra felt the weight of the trials lift slightly, replaced by a quiet understanding of her own power and courage. She had grown, transformed, and faced the first true test of the Luna's path. As they walked back toward the court, side by side, Lyra sensed a change in Kale. His presence, once distant and cold, now carried a subtle warmth, a silent acknowledgement of her courage and strength. and she knew that their bond, forged through trials and shadows, was becoming something far deeper than she had imagined. Back at the Alpha Court, the nobles awaited their return, tense and uncertain. They had heard whispers of the forest's trials, but none had expected the outcome. Lyra stood tall, shoulders back, confidence radiating from her. Cale's eyes remained on her, steady and unwavering, and for a moment the court seemed to hold its collective breath. "You have proven yourself," Cale said, his voice carrying across the hall. "Not by title, not by decree, but by courage, strength, and heart. This is the Luna." The court was silent, awed, and uncertain, as Lyra took her place beside the Alpha. She had faced ridicule, judgment, and fear, and emerged stronger, transformed. Yet she knew that this was only the beginning. The forest had tested her, but the world beyond the court still held challenges, dangers, and truths she had not yet uncovered. As Cale stepped closer, his hand brushing lightly against hers, Lyra felt a pulse of connection, a recognition of the bond they shared. It was a bond forged through trial, tempered by courage and strengthened by trust. And yet, even as the moonlight bathed them, a faint shadow lingered at the edge of her vision, a reminder that destiny was not finished, that the path of Luna and Alpha was still filled with mystery and challenge. Cale's voice, low and steady, broke the quiet. "The shadows you faced tonight were only the first. There are greater tests ahead, forces older than the court, older than the pack, that will challenge us both. But I believe you can face them, and I will stand beside you as long as you are willing to stand beside me." Lyra nodded, a sense of determination and hope filling her chest. "I am ready," she said. "Whatever comes, I will stand with you." The moonlight seemed to shine brighter, the frost glinting like diamonds across the court and forest beyond. The night held both promise and mystery, a world of shadow and light, challenge and courage. And Lyra knew that together, she and Cale could face whatever trials awaited. Yet as they looked toward the horizon, the whisper of the wind carried a hint of something ancient, waiting, patient, and inevitable. Their journey was far from over. The Alpha and Luna had claimed their place, but the story of shadows, destiny, and courage was only beginning, and the next trial would test not only their strength, but the bond that had begun to take shape between them. In the stillness of the night, under the watchful gaze of the moon, Lyra and Cale stood side by side. The court, the forest, the shadows, all of it would bend and sway, challenge and demand. But for the first time, Lyra felt a quiet certainty. She was no longer defined by others' judgment. She was Luna, strong, courageous, and unyielding. And beside the cold Alpha who had chosen her, she would face whatever came with heart, courage, and unwavering resolve.